Captain's log, stardate 3282. Dr. McCoy has summoned me to his office for an urgent meeting, but will not discuss the subject until I arrive. There is almost a panic in his voice, and he says the information needs to be acted upon soon, but that is all I know for now. Captain Kirk entered sickbay and walked to Dr. McCoy's office, where he found the doctor sitting behind his desk with Nurse Chapel sitting nervously across from him. Nurse Chapel sat with her legs and arms crossed, looking to the ground, avoiding eye contact. "What is it, Bones?" Kirk asked, looking at the obviously distraught woman. "Sit down, Jim," Bones said, pointing to the chair next to Christine. Kirk sat down and shrugged his shoulders. "What's so important we couldn't meet in the conference room?" "Nurse Chapel has relayed some information that you need to hear," McCoy replied. "If what she says is correct, we have a huge problem to deal with." "What is it?" Kirk asked. "Tell him, Nurse," McCoy said flatly. Nurse Chapel raised her head slowly and tried to make eye contact with Kirk. "Spock is going to kill himself," the nurse whispered. Shocked, Kirk asked, "How do you know? Did he tell you?" Nurse Chapel looked away and pursed her lips, refusing to answer. "That's not important," McCoy said. "What is important is that Spock is in danger, and maybe the entire crew and Enterprise." "I want to know," Kirk snapped. "How do you know that Spock is going to kill himself?" Nurse Chapel slowly turned to face Kirk. "I watched him say so on his personal logs." "His personal logs? How did you gain access to his personal logs?" Kirk asked. "You would have had to have been in his quarters." "I know," Nurse Chapel replied. "I was in his quarters." "Was he with you?" "No," Chapel replied. "I used the emergency medical code to gain entry." Kirk looked at Dr. McCoy. "Is that true? How can she do that without alerting you?" "I don't know, Jim, but she found a way in. That is not important now. You need to deal with Spock before it's too late." "In a minute," Kirk replied, pissed. "What are you doing in Spock's quarters?" Nurse Chapel squeezed her eyes closed and replied, "I go there often so I can be near him." Kirk looked at McCoy. "What's going on, Bones?" "You know she has a crush on Spock for some time. It's better if you hear it from her." Kirk looked back to Chapel. "Tell me, what were you doing?" "I am not going to discuss my personal life with you," Chapel replied. For the first time in the conversation, she was angry. "As far as I can tell, you committed a crime. Trespassing, they call it. And maybe breaking and entering," Kirk replied. Chapel glared at the captain and barked at him. "I sometimes lie in his bed. Sometimes I sit at his desk. And sometimes I take a shower in his bathroom because it makes me feel whole." "When do you find the time?" Kirk asked. "I make the time because it's important to me," Chapel replied. McCoy spoke up. "Can we get to the real reason why I called you here? Spock and his ship and his crew are in danger. Tell the captain what you heard on Spock's log." "Spock wants to remove his human half. He wants to cut it off," Chapel replied. "What do you mean by cut it off?" Kirk asked. "Like some sort of Vulcan mind trick?" "No, he wants to physically cut his right half from his left half and let the human side die. He thinks he can grow the Vulcan side back and become fully Vulcan." "And how does he plan to cut himself in two?" Kirk asked. "He made a machine with parts he printed in his quarters. He has a 3D printer for some time, and he uses it for his science experiments. All he needs is the power unit that he plans to pick up when we get to Source 3. Kirk shook his head and pondered what the nurse told him. "Have you noticed any changes in Spock's behavior lately?" he asked McCoy. "Nothing out of the usual," McCoy replied. "Why do you think this will affect the crew and the Enterprise?" Kirk asked. "Did he say anything else that would give you that impression?" "Yes," Chapel replied. "He said that he not only wanted to remove the human side from himself, but also from the ship. He says he is disgusted with being half human and wants to exterminate all humans from his life. McCoy spoke up. Where is Spock? I don't know, Kirk replied. But if he did manage to get the power unit and cut himself in two, that would be the end of any danger to the crew, unless there is a way a Vulcan can regenerate as he plans. Not that I know of, McCoy replied. I think Spock is delusional. Then the voice of Spock filled the room. No, Doctor, Spock stated, standing in the doorway. I am not delusional. I have formulated a method to regenerate my Vulcan half, and I plan to do just that. I will no longer be part of the human race, and I do plan to exterminate all humans from my immediate existence. And when do you plan on getting rid of all of us, McCoy asked. The sooner the better, Spock replied. I don't need you around interfering with my regeneration. I need peace and quiet while I become whole for the first time. Do you have a plan? Kirk asked. Nurse Chapel should have watched more of my log entries. I explained the entire procedure there. Yes, I do have a plan, and it's already in motion as we speak, Spock replied. Annoyed, McCoy asked, would you mind letting us in on it? I'd like to know how you plan to kill me. I have no issue telling you, Spock replied. There is no way to reverse the process at this point. I have sabotaged the Enterprise life support system. I don't need Scott here to know that we would be alerted to a problem with life support, Kirk said. There would be warnings going off all over the ship. Do you realize who you are speaking with? Spock asked. There will be no warnings. You will suffocate and die without any alert. McCoy barked. And what about you? Vulcans, especially half-human Vulcans, require oxygen just as much as the rest of us. True, Doctor, Spock replied. I have administered a triox compound that has increased my oxygen saturation levels that will last until you are all dead. You don't have enough triox on board for the bridge crew, let alone the rest of the crew manifest. How long do we have? Nurse Chapel asked. You have less than 3 hours, Spock replied. How do you plan to run the ship? You won't get to Source 3 for days to pick up your power unit. And what will you do when they ask to speak to me? Kirk asked. They will send supplies by shuttlecraft, Spock replied. I can fake your image and voice until I get what I need. And you think you'd be on your way? Just like that, McCoy asked. There are 100 things that could go wrong with your plan, and you know it. I will do my best to deal with whatever comes my way, Spock replied. I don't anticipate any issues. What's wrong with you Vulcans? You don't think like humans, and because of that, you have no idea what they might throw at you. What if they ask to talk to me? Do you have a duplicate of me as well, or anyone else? No, I won't need one either. I wouldn't bet on it, McCoy replied. They will be able to detect that there is no other life on board, because you, and then what will you do? Spock didn't reply. He knew Dr. McCoy had a valid point. All I need is the power unit, and I will be on my way. Followed by who knows how many ships, McCoy replied. Give it up, Spock. You may be the smartest being aboard this ship, but not even you can make your plan work. All I can do is try, Spock replied. If you want to cut yourself in half, I'll help you do it, McCoy snapped. Hell, I'll hold the laser myself and mop up the blood afterwards. I considered that for a short time, Spock said, but I cannot trust you to follow through. Beat suffocating, McCoy replied. Nurse Chapel spoke up. No, Spock, you can't do this. I love you, but this goes too far. You were the exception to my plan, Spock said. I need a nurse to aid in my healing, and I was going to allow you to live. I have a triox compound shot set up for you, so you can join me. This is my 40th Star Trek fan fiction. Please subscribe below. Captain's Log 2324. The Enterprise is on a mission to pick up a survey crew from the second moon of Triad Major and will arrive in 2 days. A shuttlecraft will transport the crew along with their survey equipment and samples to the Enterprise, where the preliminary research will begin. Lieutenant Uhura opened her shower door and grabbed a towel drying herself and wrapping her hair with another. It was late, and she was getting ready for bed when she stepped into her bedroom and saw a man sitting at the foot of the bed reading from a tablet. She didn't scream, didn't say a word, or make any attempt to leave as he looked up at her. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my quarters?" Uhura asked. "My name is John Anderson, and I am here to save you," Anderson replied. "Save me?" Uhura asked. "From what? You?" "I am from the future, and I have information that will keep you from being arrested, convicted, and executed for a murder you did not commit." "What are you talking about?" Uhura asked. John Anderson stood up and put his tablet away on his belt. He didn't try to approach Uhura, but tried to assure her he was not a threat and was trying to help. "As we speak, your Dr. McCoy, along with your chief engineer Scott, are conspiring to cover up an accident that led to the death of Yeoman Rand." "Oh my God, that's awful," Uhura said. "What happened to her?" Dr. McCoy prescribed a dose of pain medication far too strong for her that led to her death, and he is in full panic. He contacted Scott, and they are going to transport her body into space where it will never be found. "What does that have to do with me?" Uhura asked. "Captain Kirk is going to tell you to contact Starfleet and inform them that Rand is missing. McCoy will try to implicate that you were the reason why she is missing and use your communication against you," Anderson replied. "I send messages to Starfleet all the time. How would he connect me to her?" "He will claim your message was your way to cover what you did," Anderson replied. "That makes no sense." "I'm here in my quarters. I don't even know where Rand is," Uhura stated. "McCoy will be here soon. When he gets here, he will ask you about Rand and leave evidence he will plant when you aren't looking. Then he will turn you in and you will be arrested." "Why are you telling me this?" "I don't even know who you are," Uhura replied. "I have studied your case in school, and you were exonerated years after your death. I have come to right a wrong of justice." "I die in prison?" Uhura asked. "No. You were executed by hanging," Anderson replied, "along with Engineer Scott and Dr. McCoy." "Why me?" Uhura asked. "If they convicted McCoy and Scott, why wasn't I let go?" "They couldn't prove your innocence. Dr. McCoy did too good of a job of falsifying his evidence, and his story stood up to the jury." "He could have explained that I had nothing to do with it." "He could have, but it wouldn't have mattered," Anderson replied. "Scott stood up for you, but the jury still convicted all three of you, and you were all hanged 3 months later." Uhura stepped over to her dresser and looked up into her full-length mirror. "Wouldn't it have been easier for you to stop McCoy from giving her that medication in the first place? What am I supposed to do now?" "I couldn't just walk up into sickbay and tell the Enterprise doctor how to dose a patient. They would have tossed me out or arrested me for interfering with the duties of a physician. It wasn't that easy. The best I could do was find you and tell you what happened." "Have they transported Rand into space?" Anderson looked at his watch. "I don't know the exact time the transport was made or if it has already occurred." "There will be transport records," Uhura said. "All they have to do is check the records, and they will know what happened to her." "Scott will scrub the record if he hasn't already," Anderson said. "My advice to you is to not allow McCoy entrance to your quarters when he comes. Do not allow him to plant any false evidence." "When will he arrive?" Uhura asked. "According to the testimony, around 9 p.m., Anderson replied, looking to his watch. "In about 20 minutes. "What does he plant?" Uhura asked. "Her bloody ID badge and some cloth with skin and hair." "But you said it was a medication overdose." "He cut her after she died," Anderson replied, "to create a DNA trail he could pin on someone, and that someone being you." Uhura heard the bell go off on the door, and it startled her. She looked to the door and back to Anderson. Is that him? Uhura asked. Most likely, Anderson replied. Whatever you do, don't let him in. Uhura stepped over to the door and pressed the communication button. Who is it? She asked, keeping the door shut. It's me, Leonard, Dr. McCoy replied. Can I come in? I have something I need to discuss with you. Uhura looked to Anderson, who was shaking his head. I just got out of the shower, and I'm planning to go to bed. Can this wait until morning? Uhura asked. To be continued. If you guys want more of that story, I can always write some more. That was 3 pages. I normally do 3 pages. I do appreciate you showing up. There'll be a link here to go to more.